So in today's video, I've compiled a list because I've read a lot of books, and I've compiled a list of books that emanate the fall season to me. I'm from Minnesota, and we really do have 4 distinct seasons here. Actually, maybe 2. We've got winter for like ever, and then we've got fall. Fall is by far my favorite season, and this list that I want to share with you today, I'm pretty sure if you stick through the end, you're going to find something for you that you probably haven't read yet that might become a new favorite. I'm also going to share with you something that I do at the beginning of every fall that I think might be of great value to you, and we're going to get to that at the very, very end in our One for the Road. But before we can do a One for the Road, before we can even do a list, we got to do one thing. We got to roll that intro. Hey, welcome back to BellTube, everybody. If you're brand new here, my name is Brian Bell. Today, we're going to talk about a bunch of books that I think just scream and emanate fall. Don't worry if a couple of these aren't for you, because everything is time-stamped. So if you get to one and you just go, you know what, that one's not for me, you can go right on to the next one, and I bet you there's going to be something for you. If you weren't sure if I was from Minnesota or not, I just used the word betcha. Let's get into it. Now, this first book that I'm going to recommend is far and away the weirdest of the bunch. If I ever compiled a list, and maybe I'll do this for like what they call spooky season or October, but technically since it's in fall, it qualifies to be on the list. This is by a one and done author. And what I mean by that is he's written one book and then he's basically fallen off the face of the earth. The guy's name is Scott Hawkins, and the name of the book is The Library at Mount Char. Folks, this is one of the most unique, weird, bizarre books I've ever read, but it just emanates fall to me. The premise is, and there's not going to be any spoilers in any of this, by the way, but the premise of The Library at Mount Char is basically we have a godlike figure named Father who is in charge of this mystical library, and what we learn right at the beginning is that Father, you know, aka God, has gone missing, and one of his children named Carolyn, she's one of 12 children that is in charge of managing this library, is all about figuring out what's happened to him. Now, there's, Carolyn, there's 11 other children, librarians, that each have a dedicated section, what they call a catalog, in the library that deals with different magical elements, different magical themes. So if you're somebody that really likes the fantastical, borderline weird, set in basically the United States, but there's just so much out there. It's way more fantasy than urban fantasy, even though it is located in the United States. This book might be for you. I will say, I read this book about 6 years ago, and the thing has stuck with me the entire time. And I've read hundreds of books since I read The Library of Mount Char, but for whatever reason, certain very particular scenes are locked in here for a really long time. Now, if you're somebody who hates horror, doesn't like horror at all, this book may not be for you because it's not sold as a horror book, but there are absolutely some horror elements in here. So again, if you like horror, you're probably going to like this book. If you don't like horror, you might like this book, because I'm not a real big horror fan, yet here I am talking about it first on the list today. So The Library at Mount Char, it would be very difficult to really get into the synopsis without spoiling anything. That's going to be the first book today for your list if you're keeping track. Let's move on to the next one. Now, this next book series is a trilogy, and I was talking with a friend of mine last night, and we were talking about the fantasy genre as a whole, and how excited we get when we run into a book that's either a standalone or just a trilogy, because a lot of these series are just gigantic, and we're going to get to one of the biggest series as this list goes on. But the second book series that I want to share with you today, or the second book on this list, is the Edan trilogy by Dr. Philip Chase. Now, if you're a regular at the channel, if you watch a lot of Fantasy BookTube, you already know who Dr. Philip Chase is. What you might not know is how great of an author he is, because I read this book purely because he wrote it, right? I was so intrigued that a friend of mine had written this trilogy, and he wrote it over a period of 18 years. So it's not like, just on a whim he went out and wrote, this trilogy. He absolutely spent 18 years of his life. Maybe it was 16. I don't know. Is there a difference? 16, 18? Who cares? Spent a long time, right? Writing this book. And I wanted to read and find out what it was. And wow, was I impressed. I wasn't just impressed with the fact that the man can write great prose, because he's an English professor, doctor by trade. He should be able to write, a good sentence. What I was just completely blown away with, though, is his characterizations. He has very compelling characters in his book. And while it is epic fantasy, while it does sprawl continents, one of the things that I appreciate so much about the Edan trilogy, and of course book 1 is called The Way of Edan, what I appreciate so much about this is that we still have a relatively tight cast of characters, so we're not following a million plot lines, through this series. There simply isn't enough time. He also does something really unique that I have not found in a whole lot of trilogies, certainly none that really come to mind right off the bat, and that's that he resolves a lot of the questions that come up in books 1 and book 2. He doesn't wait till book 3 to resolve them. He resolves a lot of it by the end of book 2, which really serves as a springboard into the third and final book, Return to Edan, because there's a whole new situation going on with characters that you're already very familiar with. So yeah, it's a trilogy, but it's almost like, in some sense, a duology of some of the main events, and some of the other events that you think of as kind of side events really come to the forefront in the third book, which I consider to be really the best of the bunch. I think book 3 is, for me, the best. Now, I know that there's some people that like book 2 the best. You have to decide for yourself. It kind of depends where you are in time and space, in my opinion. That's a really hard thing to describe if you've not read the book yet before. But yeah, the Edan trilogy, go pick this up this fall. I don't know why it has fall emanations to me, but it certainly does. Let's move on to the next one. And real quick, before we get into the next one, if you like the vibe of this channel, we are really trying to grow. And one of the best and easiest ways you can help do that is simply hitting that like button. I know you've probably heard it in every YouTube video you've ever seen, but there's a reason for it. It does matter. It's even better if you click the subscribe button. We are growing our community. That will help this video do better, and it'll get out more fall recommendations to people that are searching that haven't ever heard of BellTube yet. I appreciate you in advance. Now, if you really, really love what's going on here, even beyond liking and subscribing, I do have a Patreon. It might be the most inexpensive Patreon online, I'm not sure, but it's less than $2. It's in the description if you like to check it out. We have a really intimate, fun community. I would love you to be part of our Patreon. Again, links in the description. Let's move on to more books. Now, this next series is not for the faint of heart, but if I was going to think about a series that for me would seem like a good idea to start in the fall, it would be The Realm of the Elderlings, and that would be book 1 in the Farseer trilogy called Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb. Chances are, if you're watching a video on fantasy and lit RPG recommendations, you've heard of Robin Hobb before. You've probably heard of Realm of the Elderlings, but you've also heard it's 16 books, and that just seems like a ton. It is, but as you probably know, and if you don't, I'll share with you, they are separated into really 3 trilogies and 1 tetralogy. And for those of you like me who had no idea what a tetralogy is, it means a series of 4 books. There, we learned a new word today. Anyway, the first series is called the Farseer trilogy, and it takes place with a main character many of you have heard of called Fitz Chivalry. Now, he starts off just as like a small child, and he is the bastard son of a prince of the land, and he's being escorted essentially back to the castle so the royalty can figure out what to do with him. They're not going to make him a ruler, but what they do is they take these kind of bastard sons and daughters and people that they want to still keep an eye on, but not really elevate to the level of royalty. They turn them into their tools. They are the ones that do the dirty work for the kingdom. And yeah, as the title may suggest, it's called Assassin's Apprentice. You have an idea right off the bat what Fitz's job and what he's being trained to do is. This is an amazing trilogy. If you've watched my best fantasy series of all time video, if you've not watched it, I'll put a card up here and you can check it out. But you'll see where Realm of the Elderlings fits for me on my, God, I said fits for me? Definitely. Wow, that was funny. Anyway, maybe not funny, but anyway, where it lands on the top 10 list, it's pretty high up there. But you can check that out. The Realm of the Elderlings is so well written in terms of characterizations. It is really difficult for me. And like I said, I've read a lot of books. It's really hard for me to pinpoint an author that's better at getting into a character's psyche than Robin Hobb. You'll understand everything about what this character, has for motivations. You'll understand not only Fitz, but obviously the whole, companions as we go along. But you just become to really think of these characters as actual humans. They're so well described and they're done in such a realistic way. We don't have any flat characters in the Realm of the Elderlings. We really don't. If anything, maybe sometimes it can be considered that the plots are maybe a little, I don't want to use the word slow because they weren't slow for me, but I guess it would be fair to say that they are maybe action reduced. If that sounds like a branding, marketing. It's now action reduced. They're action reduced, right? So she saves the action for when it's really required, but she spends the most part of it getting to inside the minds and the emotional states of these characters. And we know them so well, sometimes we can almost predict what they're going to do. And we're aggravated because we know, geez, why are you doing this to yourself again? But she understands humanity. And she understands that a lot of the times people do make mistakes over and over and over of the same variety until they get it right. And we do get a lot of that in the Realm of the Elderlings. And it's worth it. The payoff of this series, both in terms of the literary value, where you'll walk away going, that was just an incredible story, and also just the pure enjoyment of it, can't be understated. Assassin's Apprentice. It feels like fall to me. If you've not started Realm of the Elderlings, now is as good of time as any to give Assassin's Apprentice a shot. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit of urban fantasy. And this is a series that I've talked about a little bit on the channel. Not a ton, but enough that I wanted to bring it up again because it feels like fall. I don't know why. It's maybe because when I think of London, I think of kind of like a rainy fall overcast day. And that is the setting for Benedict Jacka's Alex Verus series. And I believe book 1 is called Fated. I'm going to have a graphic up here. If I've misnamed that, I will correct myself right over here somewhere. There's going to be a lot of graphics going on, you guys, because I'm not showing any physical books today. But Alex Verus, we have an urban magician. All of the magicians or sorcerers or wizards, whatever we call them in fantasy, in the Alex Verus universe, they're called mages. They tend to specialize. Alex Verus's particular specialty is divination. So he can cast his theoretical gaze, his magical gaze ahead and see all kinds of potential futures and select the one that works best for him. Now, Alex Verus isn't a good guy, but he's not really a bad guy either. He walks that fine line between the light and the dark because that is how they are separated in this universe. There are light mages and there are dark mages, and Alex Verus kind of wants to be a good guy at heart, but he was also raised and trained by a cabal of dark wizards, with one in particular being one of the best antagonists of any series in urban fantasy, bar none. I'm not going to spoil who that is, but the antagonist in the Alex Verus series is incredible. Now, if you like urban fantasy and you've not yet gotten to Alex Verus, but say maybe you've read the Dresden Files and you really appreciate it, I cannot strongly recommend enough Alex Verus. Again, that overcasty, kind of rainy, atmospheric vibe screams fall to me. Alex Verus, killer series. I hope you pick it up and let me know what you think. So this next series is written by an author named Andrew Rowe, and it sort of walks a line between fantasy and lit RPG. And it does this in a number of ways, because there's a lot of people that ask me, is this good lit RPG? And my answer is I don't really think it's entirely lit RPG because it reads much more like a fantasy story. And book one is called Sufficiently Advanced Magic. This is, like I said, Andrew Rowe's Arcane Ascension series. Now, I want to say that there's 4 books out right now in the main series, but there's also a few books out in his Weapons and Wielders series, which is a spinoff. There's also a prequel series. So there's lots to sink your teeth into if you happen to like this book. But as far as Andrew Rowe as an author goes, I highly suggest you start with Sufficiently Advanced Magic. Well, what's it about, Brian? It is about this guy named Corin Cadence, who grows up in a family of essentially magical fighters. And he goes to this tower really for 2 reasons. One, to gain his powers, because you don't just get born with them. You have to essentially earn them in this tower full of monsters. And the goddess who rules the tower then awards you what your power is going to be. And in this particular series, they're called attunements, right? So they're basically like, if you think about runes being etched on your body, and depending on which rune you get and where on your body it is, that sort of determines your magical path, through your life. So he's going to this tower to get that attunement, but also his brother went to the tower, I want to say like maybe 5 years prior, and hasn't been seen or heard from since. So really what he wants to do is figure out what happens to his brother, what happened to his brother, and if he's, savable or not. All of this is set against a backdrop of a magical academy and basically a magical university, because once you do get the attunement, you have to be able to know what to do with it. So what does that mean? That means you're going to essentially a magical school. And some of these teachers are kinder than others. We find out real quick where our main character, Corin, sits amongst the bunch of other students. It's really cool. And one of the things that I like best about this is that Corin is presented, and justifiably so, he's presented as an underdog really throughout this entire series. And I don't know about you, but I find myself quite often rooting for the underdog. So when we combine sort of the dark academy with getting new powers and meeting new friends and being in new classes, to me, that screams autumn. I promised I would use the word autumnal in this video. So that is an autumnal type of situation. I think you guys are going to like Sufficiently Advanced Magic. I know it's a big favorite of mine. Let's talk about the next books. All right, now, of course, we have to get into some lit RPG because it's BellTube, and we don't ignore lit RPG on this channel. If you are unfamiliar with it, I'll throw a card up here saying exactly, what I think lit RPG is, and maybe it's not so much of a definition video as it is why I believe epic fantasy readers ought to give lit RPG a try. The first series that I want to share with you today is called Awaken Online. This is by Travis Bagwell. It is fantastic. And again, it screams fall to me because we are dealing with a high schooler named Jason who is a bit of an outcast in his own class. And it almost starts like a typical antagonistic relationship between him, who's sort of the outcast of the class, versus the most wealthy kid, in the whole country, maybe, that's a classmate of his, and they don't get along, and we find out why, and they go play in this virtual universe. And it's interesting because, of course, the wealthy kid who is just, completely takes everything for granted, he shows up in this virtual world, which, by the way, his father owns, right? So he shows up as really kind of this white knight, hero, noble guy, even though at heart he's kind of a crappy person. And our main character, Jason, decides to be his antagonist within the game, and he becomes, if you're familiar with D&D a little bit, his alignment would be chaotic evil. He becomes a necromancer. He wants to spread his will throughout the land because initially his whole thing of going into this game in the first place was his antagonistic relationship with the son of the owner of the game. It's a really great good versus evil stories, but it's very complex. And as we get into Awaken Online, it happens to be one of my favorite lit RPG series, period. It's ongoing. There's lots of books in it, and there's lots of cool powers. There are compelling relationships that happen. There are different sets of casts that initially start off fairly intertwined only with each other, but as the books expand, they begin to converge. And that's a lot of fun, because when you have a group of, say, 3 or 4 of your favorite characters over here, and you've got 3 or 4 of your favorite characters over there, and then eventually they converge, and we see whether they get along or not. We figure out which personalities jibe. Can they accomplish a common goal? And by the way, goals are going to be something we talk about here in a minute. It's really fun stuff. So not only is it entertaining, it's great lit RPG. I recommend this series all the time. Again, we're talking about high schoolers and classes and all that stuff. It gives me a fall vibe. Let's move on to the next series. Okay, so this next series I am very new to, and it's entirely because of you guys, the BellTube community, who recommended me this series a few months ago. And I've only read 1 book so far, so I can only say that I'm recommending this for fall, because here in Minnesota, fall is hunting season, and it's absolutely bow hunting season. And I would be remiss to not talk about the Primal Hunter when it comes to lit RPG as an autumnal, I use that word again, that's pretty good fit in there, wasn't it? An autumn flavored lit RPG, The Primal Hunter. I love this book. I can't wait to get into it. You guys got me reading The Wandering Inn, kind of quickly thereafter, which killed a ton of my reading time, but I will be returning back to Primal Hunter this month. So what's it about, you might ask? Well, this office worker, Jake, is all of a sudden transported to a different world. And he used to be, an archery enthusiast back on Earth. And then he comes into this different universe because apparently the gods that run the multiverse have determined that Earth now qualifies to be part of the multiverse. And it starts to bring people in to almost like a testing grounds. So book 1 is almost like, if you think about it in terms of like a video game, it's almost like a big tutorial, which is great. It doesn't move slow. It moves fast enough, but it explains the universe really well. So I'm a huge fan of the Primal Hunter. I can't wait to get more into it. But as I was trying to come up with this list today of which books or which series scream fall, I thought about all the orange vests that I see around Minnesota this time of year. And I was like, you know what? I got to add the Primal Hunter in here because the community was right. I absolutely love this series, and I do want to recommend it to anybody who's watching. And that's going to get me to the one for the road today. And I think it's an important one, so I hope you stick around for this. Today for one for the road, I want to talk about changing of the seasons and examining our goals and maybe setting some new ones. I think it is a perfect time. Don't wait till January 1st, right? Don't wait till New Year, new me, new goals, all that. Why waste the next 3 months? It's the changing of the season. It's right now as I'm filming this is the first week of September. But whenever you happen to be watching it, let's just pretend it's right now, okay? So if you're watching this in the future, pretend you're coming upon a new season for you, and you want to think about a goal or two that you've had in the back of your mind, or maybe at the forefront of your mind for a while, and now it's time to take action. Before we take action on the goal, I think it is hugely important to take out a pen and in huge capital letters, write the word why. W-H-Y ? Because when it comes to goals and goal setting and goal achievement, if you do not have a strong enough why, as it were, if you don't have a big enough reason why, it's going to be really hard to stay consistent with your goal over time. We're creatures of habit. We get in moods. Some days we feel like doing something. Some days we don't. But if you have a compelling why that is driving you, and that's what drives a lot of these fantasy books too, right? I mean, we get quests. Well, why are they going to kill the dragon? Because they have to save the land. That's a big enough why. Or why is a character maybe in a literary fiction book going on this journey of self-reflection? Because they're not sure who they are. And that's a big enough why. So for today's one for the road, let's talk about these goals and let's really figure out a compelling list of reasons why that will keep us motivated on the days that we don't feel like it. Now, I'm going to share with you one of my own personal goals, just to kind of give an example of what I mean here. One of my goals is I want to drop 10 pounds. I've noticed since I started this channel, and no, I'm not blaming the channel, but I've noticed since I started the channel, I've probably put on 10 to 12 pounds, and I would like them to melt away. Okay, so I know I want to lose, 10 to 12 pounds. The better question is why do I want to lose 10 to 12 pounds? Well, I made a list this morning before I did this video because I wanted to share with you exactly how I did it. What's a reason? Well, my back has been hurting a little bit, right? My low back has been hurting because I tend to carry my weight in my gut, as some older guys tend to do. And I would just love to not have some low back pain from time to time. I know that if I were to basically tie a 10-pound dumbbell around my waist and walk around with it for several months, my back would probably be hurting. That's exactly what I've done here is I've put on these 10 or 12 pounds and I've got that weight around my gut. And so no wonder my back is hurting. So for me, one of the whys is I want to not have back pain. That's a great why for me. Another thing is that I make YouTube videos and I watch them back because I want to see where I can make incremental improvements on each video that I do. I also participate, as you may know, or maybe you don't know, but I participate in a lot of live streams and group collabs. And over the last 6 months, as I've been watching myself on video, I've noticed, hey, Brian, not only do you carry weight in your gut, you also carry it in your face. And yeah, I've got the dimples that maybe get me away with a little bit of it. This is a place that I put weight on first. And the good news is it's also the place that I take weight off of first. And I decided, I would rather see myself played back on video, not looking bloated. That is a big why for me. Call it vanity, call it, I don't know, call it ego, call it whatever you like. But I know for me, that is a compelling why. And that's what I'm challenging all of us here to do today is come up with some compelling whys once you've decided what a particular goal might be. And then very, very simply write down a couple of tasks that you can do. They don't need to be huge. They can be just tiny little incremental tasks that you can do that slowly move you towards that goal accomplishment. So maybe for me, it's, hey, maybe I won't have potato chips at lunch today. And maybe I'll substitute it with something a little bit healthier. Maybe I'll have some vegetables or fruit. Whatever it is, that's just kind of a dumb example. But again, tiny little choices that can impact the results of our goal. They're all great, but you're not going to stick with it unless you have a compelling enough why. I think I've probably talked a lot about that. Let's talk about fall books together. I would love to know in the comments what you consider to be an amazing fall read, because I make a lot of my TBR based on what you guys recommend. And we are a community here, right? So we've got, I don't know, like 2,700, somewhere's around about their subscribers. I'd like to see that grow. And the cool part is that we all help each other in different ways with recommendations. Please put in the comments what you feel in your gut are great fall vibe reads. You'll probably end up putting some books on some TBRs and very likely put some books on my TBRs, which means I can come back and make more videos for you guys about great contributions the BellTube community has made, because sneak peek, that video will be forthcoming. Until then, you guys stay positive as always. And of course, here's your fortune.